שנבקש לו יהי. So I'm here to show the power of communal singing, which is a challenge to do online. So if each and every one of you can, in their own home, join with me in the words of Naomi Shemer, Kol shenevakesh lu yehi, all that we request, may it be. מכל ענות אני שומעת קול שופר וקול תופים, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו תשמע בתוך כל אלה ואחת מפי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. בתוך שכונה קטנה מוצלת בית קט עם גג אדום, קול שנבקש לו יהי. זה סוף הקיץ, סוף הדרך, תן להם לשוב הלום, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. ואם פתאום נזרח מאופל על ראשינו אור כוכב, קול שנבקש לו יהי. אז תן שלווה ותן גם כוח לכל אלה שנאהב, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי. לו יהי, לו יהי, אנא לו יהי, קול שנבקש לו יהי.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for that beautiful musical introduction. Kaylee is a musician and community organizer joining us from Yafo, and she'll be with us towards the end of our time together. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for some of you, this evening for others, for an evening to commemorate October 7th and its aftermath, together as Israelis and global Jewry. My name is Tracy Friedberg, Director of the Tisch Center for Jewish Dialogue at ANU Museum of the Jewish People. In this very intense, deeply sad, and often confusing period in which we're meant to be experiencing Jewish joy in the lead up to Sukkot, we are surrounded by the pain of October 7th. All those that we have lost and continue to lose on a daily basis here in Israel, the 101 hostages who we pray and demand will be home soon, and the many injured amongst us. Within this pain, we can find understanding, clarity, as well as hope, belonging, and ultimately resilience by placing this period within a Jewish story, within Jewish memory, and exercising this story, exercising this memory together within the Jewish people. That is what we aim to explore and do today. We are going to commemorate October 7th by feeling, thinking, and engaging together in the next 90 minutes. We will start with a panel led by Naama Klar, Director of ANU's Koret School for Jewish Peoplehood. Joining Naama, we are honored to welcome Dara Horn, award-winning author of People Love Dead Jews, Jeremy Fogel, lecturer of Jewish philosophy at Tel Aviv University and host of the podcast Think and Drink Different, and Dana Sender-Mulla, co-founder of Zikaron Basalon and director of leadership development at Momentum. Unfortunately, Rabbi Dr. J.J. Schachter will not be able to join us for medical reasons. We wish him a speedy recovery. Following the panel, we will hear from Rabbi Dr. Tamir Granot, who will share his own personal story of loss and how he has responded. Then all of you, the participants, will be divided into small breakout groups to meet fellow living Jews and share and listen to each other's experiences from this period. We'll be guiding you along the way as we transition from element to element. Then we will all come back together with Kaylee for our closing. I would like to thank our co-organizers at the Weizmann National Museum of American Jewish History and our additional co-sponsors, Masa Israel Journey, Hillel Tel Aviv, Momentum, Zikaron B'Salon, and the Israeli Coalition. 2 technical matters. The first is we hope that it's going to be a quiet evening, but if sirens do go off, the Israelis are going to have to leave to go to a safe space, and we'll be back with you in 10 minutes, and someone else will be taking over. And the second, we do have live translation. So those who are Hebrew speakers can go to more, and then within more, there's interpretation. And Rabbi Dr. Tamir Granot is going to be speaking in Hebrew. So for the English speakers, you're going to go to the interpretation and get a live English translation. But we'll be guiding you along the way. With that being said, I'm going to hand over the mic to Naama Klar, who will be facilitating our panel discussion. Thank you.
Toda, Tracy, thank you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity of commemorating October 7th together. And I want to start with sharing that I'm a Tel Avivian mother of 2. And I find myself when we learn about a new fallen soldier or someone that was affected by October 7th, I'm finding myself working to remember his or her name, reading it a couple of times out loud, trying to really remember. So it's really easy for me to remember that the last fallen soldier we've heard about only a couple of hours ago is Koren Bitan. And preparing to this panel, I actually asked myself, why? Why am I trying to remember the names? Obviously, I value their contribution to my personal and my children's safety and security, the mere ability to go on living in this land is thanks to their sacrifice. But memory matters a lot for the Jewish people, and for very curious reasons too. So we're here tonight to explore this lifetime that we call October 7th as a Jewish moment, as a Jewish event, something that happens to our Jewish identity, rather than just to our security or social status and other arenas. And with that in mind, I want to start with the question of what is the role of Jewish memory? How does Jewish memory serve or disserve our people, us as individuals, as communities, as organizations? And I want to ask Dara to actually start and try and answer this question that we're going to struggle with in the next couple of minutes.
Thank you, Naama. I want to say thank you to everyone who's here, and I'm really grateful to Ami Museum and also to the Weizmann Museum in Philadelphia, the counterpart in the United States, for inviting me and for organizing this. It was pointed out as we were planning this that there have been actually quite few joint events between Israeli and diaspora communities. To me, it didn't look that way because here in the United States, almost all of our Jewish events include Israeli speakers. But I understand that that isn't always the case in Israel, so I'm really honored to participate today. I want to start by saying that it's this moment, what part of the incredible difficulty of this moment, and as we frame this around Jewish memory, is that you can't have a memory of something that's still happening, right? I mean, and this is what we are all struggling with, right? I mean, this would be, God willing, an easier event to have, 20 years from now when we have something to look back on and we know how the story ends, right? And this is, obviously we're meeting in a moment when, obviously we are still praying for hostages, right? We still have, men and women fighting, and there's, it's very hard for any of us to envision where this is going from here. But I'm thinking back on many times in Jewish history when this was true, when people were commemorating the Shoah while it was happening. There were communities in New York City that were gathering at YIVO and saying Kaddish for the Jews who were being murdered while they were being murdered. This is something that is happening. And I think that what was raised by this panel is this idea that this is a moment that's not only happening to us as individuals or us as societies, in Israel and in other places in the diaspora, but this is really something that is happening, as you said, Naama, to our Jewish identity, to each person's Jewish identity. This is sort of almost like an activation moment for us as part of Am Yisrael. And I was reminded of there's a Yiddish novel by the American Yiddish poet Yankov Glatstein, where he writes about returning to Poland in the years immediately before the Shoah, and he had met some people who had decided to to return to their Jewish roots, people who had left the Jewish community and were coming back. And one of these people said to him, "I feel like there's an ancestor inside me who is summoning me back." And I think that all of us have had that kind of experience and it expresses itself in different ways for different people. But what I think is really powerful about this is that what it means is we have agency over what this moment will mean to us. We don't have control over this moment, but we have control over how we respond to this moment. I've often struggled with what the 20th century historian Salo Baron called the lachrymose view of Jewish history. Lachrymose meaning filled with tears, right? That this is, Jewish history is sort of this litany of horror, and he was always pushing back on that. And I always used to agree with pushing back on that, but I now understand this sort of litany of horror really differently, because I think that these moments that unfortunately so often happen in Jewish history, I see them now as sort of a contact point, right? Almost like an electrical contact point. And it's a contact point between ourselves as individuals and Am Yisrael as a whole through time and space. And it's, in a sense, between us and eternity. And what I think is amazing about these extremely dark moments in our history is that they all offer us these opportunities for agency. I remember reading once about the first churban the second churban of this Bayit Sheni, of the second destruction of the second temple. And there was, I remember reading to think about that moment of that destruction, that there are two roads out of Jerusalem. One goes to Mitzada, right? One goes to the fortress of Masada, which was, this mass suicide, and the other went to Yavna, right, which was the beginning of a new understanding of Jewish life. And, I now sort of understand that the power of this lachrymose view of Jewish history, this tear-filled view of Jewish history, is not in this litany of horror, but it's really in the astonishing resilience that we have seen in Am Yisrael since ancient times. And this is, as you say, a global event, and it's a global Jewish event that has activated this connection that all of us have to Am Yisrael. I want to speak about this from the point of view of American Jews, because I think that there's, this has also changed the relationship between Israeli Jews and Jews in the diaspora. It's been said that there's other moments in Israeli history where there's, if you could think of the 6-Day War as an activation of, Jews around the world becoming Zionists. Here, there's a way that people have said that this is a moment of Israeli Jews becoming Jewish. I also think that there's sort of a different, there's another kind of framework that I think is happening to us in these communities, where both communities are experiencing this really shocking moment. And in my book, People Love Dead Jews, I write about sort of two forms of anti-Semitism that have plagued the Jewish people through history. And I name them after the holidays where we celebrate triumphs over them, Purim and Hanukkah. And I think of in Israel that it's almost more similar to the challenge that's posed by the holiday in Purim, right? Where there's this desire to just annihilate Jews, like take their lives, right? This is a physical attack on Jewish people's bodies. Whereas the Hanukkah story, at least at the beginning of the Hanukkah story, it's really as an attack on Jewish people's souls. And I think that both of these experiences are being felt by people throughout in Israel and in the diaspora. And I know that this is something that, for me as an American Jew, many of us have experienced this moment where it feels that it is less an attack on our bodies and more an attack on our souls. This is in a moment where you're being told by the non-Jewish societies surrounding you that you're not allowed to be alive. We are being told by the non-Jewish societies around us that we are not allowed to be who we are. And, this is an attempt to sort of push Jews out of public life in these non-Jewish societies. But what I've noticed is that it's now also the Purim, the story of the Megillah, that also feels familiar. I think that in some ways, Jews in Israel are living in the ending chapters of the Megillah, right, where there's this tremendous war, and Jews in the diaspora are maybe living in the beginning parts of the Megillah, where Mordechai goes to Esther and asks and tells her that she has to go to the king to defend her people. And she says, well, if she's terrified to do this, right? And she says, if I go to the king, I could be killed, right? But then he says, maybe this is the moment for which you became king. This is why you've become queen, is to use your power in this moment. And I will admit that I was lahavdil, but thinking about this moment in many moments in the past year, including when I testified in Congress on behalf of our community. And I think that we, as certainly in diaspora community, are experiencing this Queen Esther moment where we have to rise up and take this moment where we announce to everyone who we are, which is part of Am Yisrael. All of us are experiencing this moment in our own ways, but what I think is important, and I want to weave with this, is that our tradition really gives us space to mourn these horrible catastrophes. We saw this in, those of us who were just, if we were observing a traditional Yom Kippur, you have the Ela Eskara, where you have this sort of stories of these people who were tortured to death by the Romans, and there's this sort of tradition of understanding this where there's the Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, who's wrapped in the Torah scroll, and he says that the parchment is burning, but the letters are flying free. And I think that all of us have access still to those letters. And to me, that this is the reason that we have access to those letters is because of agency. It is because all of our ancestors made a decision to continue this story and to continue writing in these letters. And now I think we have an opportunity to create a new chapter in Jewish life. And we have every reason to believe that there's possibilities before us that we can't even imagine, because Jewish life is always unimaginable and the unexpected is always possible.
Wow. So just to try and take the gist out of this very rich and fascinating answer. So memory is telling yourself what is happening. And in that sense, it gives agency back to you, that while something is happening to you and you might be the victim or the subject of it, but you still have the agency to tell it. And in that sense, it untaps some hidden forces like belonging and resilience that can endure generations, like the letters that were in the air but still survive in some form or way. And also you're saying about this moment as a Jewish moment is that we're experiencing simultaneous threats that are different but with shared origin, which is maybe unprecedented because it's a global world like it has never been before. So Purim and Hanukkah can happen simultaneously in our reality.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And lastly, I want to share that I've learned from your book that the Sonderkommando rebellion, those same people who disposed the dead bodies in the death camps, actually happened exactly 80 years before October 7th.
Yes. Yes, and that was, yes.
To see some authority to commemorate whilst things are still happening, which we need to take from our memory.
Yes,
thank you so much. Maybe to add an Israeli but yet American savvy point of view, I want to ask my friend Dana to comment on the same question. What is the role of Jewish memory? Dana, we can't hear you. You need to unmute.
Excuse me. So just first of all and foremost to say thank you for inviting me, and I feel very humbled to be here and be a part of this event. For me to begin with, when thinking about memory is an action. It's a very Jewish thing to do. It's actually a mitzvah. It's commanded to us by halacha, by Jewish law, to remember and to speak of the memories we hold. So it's not just knowing what happened, but to live it and tell it and share the story. That's the essence of memory in a Jewish perspective. It's really in our DNA as a people to remember and to tell the tale for future generations, to be the torch holders, the memory keepers. And we have a saying from the Haggadah that we sit together on Pesach and we say, V'yigadet lebincha, tell your son, tell your daughter, tell the next generations. Because really speaking to our memories and feeling that we are all together, if it's in Mount Sinai, or that we are all together in the Holocaust, or that we were all together in the formation of the State of Israel, or that we were all together when October 7th happened, that bearing that moment and bearing that memory helps us become, in essence, an actualized part of Klal Yisrael. And it speaks to becoming more active in sharing the memory and not just keeping it to yourself. And October 7th, in so many ways, just completely reopened what was then before a Jewish historical timeline, affirming that we live in a revolutionary time in Jewish history. And this is yet a new chapter in our book that will be studied and learned many more years to go. And as Dara said, this book is not yet finished. It's still in the writing. It probably will be for many more years. But October 7th also brought us back to a new way of thinking about us as a people and how we remember. Because for many, many generations, we were all focused on a covenant of destiny, Brit Goral. So we thought of ourselves as Jews because of the things that happened to us. And we were focused on remembering this happened to us, and this happened to us, and this happened to us, and this is our story. But rather, for so many years, Zikaron Basalon, for over a decade now, has been really trying to shift the mindset from a covenant of destiny, Brit Goral, into a covenant of purpose, Brit Ye'ud. What is our purpose as a people and as Jews? So we are not defined by what happened to us, but we are defined by who we decide to be at that moment. So Zikaron Basalon is, as I said, a social movement that's been around now for over a decade, is one that gives space and voice to Holocaust remembrance, with more than 2 million people a year who participate in this very intimate, proactive setting, where we transition from both covenants. And we do so in 3 ways. And our platform has been very successful in these following 3 steps. So the first step is really being focused on deep listening and bearing witness, giving space to the memory, whether if it's firsthand witness or any other way, if it's video or any other way that it can be transmitted, but to be fully present in deep listening. The second part is really starting to deeply step out of the past and bring it into the present. And it could be in many ways, through music or song, or through deep questions of who are we today in the face of what happened to us. And finally, as we transition to the third part of the evening, this goes to the beginning of what I said earlier, is how do we take ownership of the memory and become the torch holders and the memory bearers? And how do we figure out what can we learn from the past to influence the future? Davka, in spite of what happened, to build a better world and pursue tikkun olam, to mend our broken world. We realize that along the years that this platform has been really a healing and a very meaningful platform through Zikaron Basalon for both those who experienced the trauma, but also those who wanted to become a part of the story and to become bearers of that memory as well. And when October 7th happened, Zikaron Basalon was first and foremost very focused on supporting Holocaust survivors that were reliving trauma. But at the same time, we also did 2 additional things. One, which was very, very special, we connected Holocaust survivors with young survivors of October 7th. And when one was imagining herself sitting in the closet for 12 hours waiting to be saved, she could meet an elderly woman telling her, I too hid in the closet for 4 years waiting to be saved. And they could share that story and they could have that deep, deep sense of understanding, and also seeing that one can step out of that and relive a full life again. The next thing we did was that we took all of our learnings and all of our expertise from this decade of being a social movement in Israel and in the world, and created a new initiative called Salon Otef, which was in partnership with many Israeli organizations supporting survivors, where we were able to offer this very meaningful platform in over 500 spaces around Israel, where people were able to connect, not just bear witness to the story, the very many stories that were shared, but really to start thinking already now in the present, before this chapter is sealed, what is our role in creating the narrative to move forward? We can't control what happened, but we can take control of the narrative, of the story and the memory we want to share with others. So going back to conclude, Jewish memory, it's a mitzvah for us as Jews, first and foremost. And secondly, as Zikaron Basalon teaches us, memory is an opportunity and an obligation, not just to remember, but to take positive action.
So Dana, you've recapped so beautifully. I just want to add to that you've also mentioned that memory is what takes an event throughout time to go beyond time. So it's not just in the past, it's becoming something of the present, potentially something of the future, due to the mechanism of memory within the Jewish people, which is a very powerful thought. With that in mind, I want to invite Jeremy, our final panelist, to respond to the question 2. What is the role of Jewish memory? How does it serve us? How does it work for us?
Thank you, Naama, and thank you for the very beautiful words we heard from our esteemed panelists, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would think that if we are thinking of memory at this time, it's important as ever to repeat and remember today, as all days, that 101 of our brothers and sisters are still being held in the most awful circumstances, that we can't forget about them, not on the year after, not on a less, not more, and not even with all the other dramatic events that we are witnessing and that we will be witnessing, and until such time as they will not be brought back. I don't think that memory can capture the catastrophe. It is a living, ongoing catastrophe for them, for their families, and of course for all the families of the people who have suffered, who are suffering, whose lives has been lost. I want to echo what Dara said about the complexities of thinking of the 7th of October in terms of memorialization, given that it is an ongoing catastrophe. The dramatic and terrible events, the awful war we find ourselves in and we have been fighting ever since, are unfortunately far from over at this time. But I think that we can say more generally that the question of memory really relates to the question of identity and to another question which I think is not sufficiently emphasized in Jewish culture and in Israeli culture, the question of imagination. In terms of memory versus identity, I think that it is interesting even to note the degree to which the attempt at creating national memorials are controversial, are a source of cultural, political dispute. There were two different memorial events on the 7th, and the memorial event now being planned by the current government for the Hebrew date, or the day after the Hebrew date, is also controversial, because I think a lot of the families of the people who died feel that there's a certain narrative being promoted in the way in which the story of the 7th of October will be remembered and will be contextualized. Now, the thing is, there's always a narrative, or at least a select narratives that are being promoted in the way in which we choose to remember our history more widely, not only, of course, of the drama of the 7th of October, but much more widely. And I think that's also part of the power of Jewish memory, is the degree to which it is important to remember beyond that which might, beyond any particular perspective, beyond any particular narrative, in order to enrich the possibilities of thinking of our identity and of our imagination. The first thing I always say to, well, I call them kids, but to young students who come and study Jewish philosophy at Tel Aviv University, is, we find ourselves in class and sometimes they make remarks like, well, but Judaism is against LGBTQ rights, or Judaism is for X, or Judaism is against that. And I always ask them, I say, well, we're in an academic setting, we're trying to be precise. I've never heard Judaism tell me anything. There isn't any one Judaism. It's always some Jew somewhere. Tell me who and when. Tell me which Jewish movement you are referring to. Tell me which Jewish interpretation you are referring to. Tell me which Jewish form of leadership you are referring to. And I think that's a terribly important thing to remember. Nietzsche has this really amazing sentence. He says, you can only define that which has no history. Anything, you can define an even-sided triangle, because an even-sided triangle is a ahistorical object. It never changes. But anything that has a history is always evolving, always changing. Meanings change, values are prioritized differently, external influences come to bear, internal dynamics change things. You can't define something that has a history. And of course, Judaism is an eminently historical phenomena. So what is Judaism? Is Judaism an ancient cult based on the temple, at the heart of which was the sacrifice of animals to a rather nationalistic God with universal aspirations? Is Judaism the complete revolution created by the sages that turned a cult of a temple into the cult of a text and cult of prayer? Is Judaism the highly philosophical, abstract Judaism of Maimonides? Is it the contrarily very mythical, very personalized Judaism of the Kabbalah? Is it the enlightened Judaism of Moses Mendelssohn, the popular, joyful Judaism of early Hasidism? Is it the completely secularized Judaism of Freud, the Judaism of Maran, or of the current Israeli leadership, the Judaism of Larry David in America? These are all different Jewish phenomena, and I'm not sure there's some kind of essentialist definition that would capture them all. What we find here is a genealogy of a very complex phenomena that always changes and that is always evolving. And I think that's terribly important in terms of our current identity, because reminding ourselves of the kaleidoscopic nature of Jewish history, reminding ourselves of the richness of our Jewish past, enables us to free ourselves from very restrictive definitions of what Judaism is and what it isn't today. You will often find, and I think that's a rather violent political act, people in power seeking to define for everybody else what Judaism is. But really what they are saying is that my Judaism should be everybody's Judaism. And of course, it demands a very easy exercise in history and in memory to realize that this is completely unfound. And looking back enables us to realize the degree to which we are free to experiment and to create and to redefine as Jews our Judaism as we see fit, according to our values, according to our perceptions, according to our sensitivities. We are not bound by the Judaism of the past. I always say that the sages were far more reform-oriented than even the most ardent reformist Jews today. And this takes me to the importance of imagination. I think that in some ways, Judaism presents it, or Jewish voices talk often, and we all talk often about memory, which is understandable given the length of and breadth of Jewish history behind us. But I do think that we need to balance the emphasis on memory with an emphasis on imagination, on thinking about where our future might lie, especially because throughout the years, we have had more than our share of catastrophes, of massacres, it's a discourse that is important to maintain, but it is also important not to be imprisoned by. My friend Ishai Rosenzweig's book about the meaning of Jewish holidays starts with a story about how his young daughter comes back from the kindergarten, and she says, "I don't understand Shavuot. Who tried to kill us?" In a sense, what I'm trying to say is that I hope we might reach a certain self-assurance and maturity as Jews to try to balance our rather apocalyptic memory with an imagination that is open to different possibilities and to a future for our kids that might be different than the darker aspects of our past, and certainly different than this very dark period we are going through at the moment.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to try and recap and challenge at the same time. I absolutely agree that you can't be hostage of what happened to you and be bound to it for a lifetime and being forced to relive the dark times because of memory. I also think that evolution doesn't mean tusking everything into the historical being. It means preserving those pieces in DNA that are actually inherited to you or your survival, tasking those who are a heavy load or holding you back, and adapting new while making sure it all come across with the existing core DNA. That's adaptation. And memory, so in other words, if a community in the Jewish people will come and say, we're Jews, but we do not accept the importance of the remembrance of the Holocaust, the Shoah, or the remembrance of the ruin of the Second Temple, I will not accept that. And it's not about pluralism, it's about basically Jews doesn't have history, we have memory, as we've all learned from our teacher Avram Infeld. So I was trying to recap what you've said. You can't be the hostage. I personally don't think we can just ignore the memory that is the common knowledge. It's not all, it's power dynamics, and it's also what eventually was remembered, because as we know, the ruin of the Second Temple has a plethora of reasons in our Jewish books, but one was selected to be remembered by every kindergarten child. I'm going to let you respond, but before that, I'm going to add the second question, and you're going to pick on what you're answering. And my second question to you first, Jeremy, is in which ways this lifetime of October 7th is a Jewish moment for you, individually, family-wise, professionally, as a thought leader, etc. Bevakasha, Jeremy.
Thank you, Naama. Well, first of all, of course, you are completely entitled to accept whoever so you please as Jewish or not Jewish, but historically that doesn't go very well. You know, I think mostly people who feel that they are Jewish. I think Leonard Cohen's got this poem. He says, to anyone who says that I'm not Jewish, you're not Jewish, or something like this. You know. I think it's a perilous path, and often, you know, it might be meaningful for your sense of identity. I don't think it would be particularly meaningful for the sense of identity of any Jewish person who might be left outside of the bounds of your definition. And you know, and I agree with you that there's a certain there's some values that tend to stay with us longer. I just sometimes do feel that we can't be beholden to them with quite the sense of authority we attribute to them. There's a term that is ubiquitous and omnipotent in Israeli discourse, shorashim, you know, roots. And sometimes I think it's important to remind ourselves on a very plain level that it's a metaphor. You know, we are mammals. We are not plants. We do not have roots. We never had in the history of our evolution roots. And again, I understand that it's a metaphor, and we use metaphors to express ourselves. But what I don't like about that metaphor is the notion that a plant is fed in a very static kind of manner from its roots. And if it's disconnected from its roots, then it fades away. And you know, I don't necessarily feel that I'm a similar kind of being. I think that human beings are essentially moving. We move. We need to move. Movement is key for our survival, as opposed to plants and trees. I love trees and plants. I'm, you know, vegan. I live off of them. But we need movement to survive. And I prefer to think in metaphors of a torch that has to be handed in. It's more movable. It's not sedentary. Maybe it's because, you know, especially us as a wandering people, we understand the importance of movement. Now, in terms of whether the 7th of October is a Jewish moment.
For you.
For me.
For you, Jeremy, yeah.
Well, I would say it's, for me, both a Jewish and an Israeli moment. I think that we live in a time where, you know, clickbait culture and the ways in which the digitalization of human life is pushing us to think in terms of slogans and think in terms of tweet length argument is obviously deplorable. And I think we have to be able to try to, you know, there's the sense, there's the word that also became so important after the 7th of October, conception. Everybody's obsessing about the conception and, you know, whether the conception that we had before led to it. And, you know, whoever you don't agree with politically, you say, well, you're still entrapped by the conception. And I've been thinking a lot about what it means to think without conception, if conception is such a dangerous thing. And obviously, I don't think you can. We all have a conception where we should at least be able to think of reality through different conceptions. So to enrich and challenge ourselves. So on the one hand, I do think, obviously, this is for me a very Jewish moment. And I think Dana or Dara mentioned about how this is a moment where Israelis became Jews, and I know that it's a sentiment that is widely shared. The sense that we are again part of this ancient history of persecution, of death. It's yet another pogrom, yet another Holocaust-like moment, yet another ancient Jewish catastrophe. But at the very same time, I also do think that we have to keep in mind the particularities of the Israeli situation, the complexities of the Israeli situation, the ways in which the unsustainability of our current geopolitical situation are part of what inevitably leads to this state of affairs. And we have to keep, at the very least, both of these conceptions, and I would think different conceptions, regional conceptions, world conceptions in mind in order to try and survive the current crisis.
So a moment to rethink some of our conceptions about ourselves. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Dana, same question. I'm forcing to ask you to keep it very brief. In which ways this October 7th lifetime is Jewish for you?
So, and this time I'm actually unmuted myself. As an Israeli that lives in the US for the past 2 years and will be here for an additional 2, I have a very strong sense by living in Jewish communities outside of Israel that this is by far a very deep, meaningful Jewish event, not just an Israeli one. And while my heart, my family, my friends are in Israel, and there are so many particular things happening in Israel, for me, I experience a very, very Jewish moment. I am very, fortunate to be working for a global Jewish women's movement, Momentum, where we invest in Jewish moms because we believe that investing in mothers is the best return on investment in future generations, speaking of memory and creating tradition and creating connection for future generations. And we've seen at Momentum, I have a lot to say about this, keep it short. And our target audience is the less affiliated Jewish women. And we've been working with over 24,000 women in the past over a decade. And we've seen a rise of a spiritual army of Jewish moms marching since October 7th to say Hineni, to say, here I am. And it's so easy when these horrible things happen, immediately Jews around the world, there are consequences for them. Immediately, if it's violence, if it's anti-Semitism in so many different ways and forms. And while many of them could have shied away and said, I don't need this, I don't want to be a part of this, like, let me shelter my family and disassociate myself from being Jewish because it comes with such a price. So many of them stood up, stood tall, stood proud, and said, this is my family and this is my home, and this is where I need to put my money, my effort, my time, my voice, my standing. So we have definitely seen our army of spiritual moms marching, but we've also heard them say really difficult things. For instance, a mother that for mothers that have been asking, oh, which college will my son or daughter be accepted to, are now asking completely different questions. They're asking, where will my son or daughter be safe to go to college? These are very serious questions about physical safety, spiritual safety. People are more and more and more seeking to be connected with Jewish organizations and Jewish affiliation because of October 7th. It's been a catalyst of unity, not uniformity in any way, but of unity. And I can say personally, in my role in leadership development, I've seen so many Jewish women around the world coming to ask, requesting to be guided and trained in leadership skills so that they could have more strategic impact in their communities and beyond. And I think that's an incredible sign, a positive sign of how to take memory and turn it into positive action from our comment before. And for me as Dana, I can say that we live here in Florida, but my husband packed up his gear on October 8th and left for Israel to fight for a period of time. And I've seen the Jewish community stand behind us and stand together with us, not just the Israeli community here, but also the Jewish one, and really support me and our 4 children during this time. And I think it's commendable. And we ask these women with momentum and myself and the community all the time, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And we call them with our values, with momentum, with the Zikaron Basalon, we call people to say, Hineni, here I am. This is the moment for us as Jews to come together and to act.
Beautiful. Dara, our honorable last panelist for this round, in which ways October 7th is a Jewish lifetime for you?
Well, so I wrote this book, People Love Dead Jews. It's a book, it's a nonfiction, obviously, book about Jews in a non-Jewish society. I published it 3 years ago, and before that, I was writing novels. I wrote novels that are all about Jewish life in different, different contexts. I thought of this book just sort of as a detour from writing novels. It has completely derailed my life since October 7th. I feel that there are now in the United States, certainly what, this isn't my phrase, I forget who said this, October 8th Jews. Many people who, sort of realized their sort of became activated in their Jewish life and identity after October 7th. But what has happened to me is because I wrote this book and because I sort of already had a national voice on this issue, I've been inundated with American Jews asking me for help. And when I say help, I mean, people just come to me telling me their horror story experiences and, what can you do? Can you help me? Obviously this happened to me very explicitly with Jewish students. I was asked, 2 weeks after October 7th, I was asked to serve on this advisory committee at Harvard, advising the now former president of Harvard, who did not take our advice, but immediately I was inundated with Jewish students, not only from Harvard, from many countries, schools around the country asking for help. But then it did not stop at that. It was, doctors, right, who were being pushed out of their, hospitals, writers who were, being, their books couldn't be published anymore, psychologists who were being, teachers being pushed out of their labor unions, things like this, who were coming to me. I'm a novelist, right? Like this is not my world at all, right? I'm not a political activist. I'm not, this is, I'm not a therapist. I mean, I felt so unqualified to do any of this. But, everyone, there's just this weight and urgency that I feel on myself, I mean, I would never have thought that I would be here, talking to members of Congress. Like I'm a novelist. My next book is is a book for children about a talking goat. It is the most bizarre thing to me that this is what I'm now doing. But one thing that I have access to is because I'm hearing everyone's stories, because everyone is coming to me and pouring these things into me. The other thing that I'm hearing from all the time are responses from non-Jewish Americans. And what I've discovered actually is that certainly in the United States, I don't know about in other diaspora communities, but I actually think there's a lot of opportunity because there are enormous numbers of people who have a whole lot of goodwill toward the Jewish community, who really want to, be a friend of the Jewish community, maybe don't know how. There is so much more ignorance than malice, and this is an opportunity. So some of my work at the Weitzman is related to this. The Weitzman is developing new educational programs for non-Jewish children and students to learn about Jewish life, because most people are, to go back to the story of Purim, very few people are Haman. Most people are Achashverosh, right? They just, did I sign that decree? I must have been drunk, right? I mean, most people just don't know anything. That is an opportunity for all of us to educate ourselves and our neighbors. And I think that will be a big part of rewriting the next chapter in Israel and the diaspora, is the way we're turning this moment into really an opportunity to, as people have also have said, to rewrite this story and to find new ways of telling this story to bring in people who maybe haven't heard it before.
Wow. Thank you, dear panelists, for this thought and emotions provoking panel. To finish this part of our gathering tonight, I'm going to invite Rabbi Dr. Tamir Granot to speak for a few minutes. Rabbi Dr. Granot is the head of Yeshivat Orot Shaul in Tel Aviv, and he's the father of IDF soldier Amitai Tzvi Zichro Livracha, who fell in the war nearly a year ago. Rabbi Dr. Granot has exceptional leadership on mending this moment in time, the current rupture, the crisis under the crisis, and I salute your leadership and work in this front. Rabbi Dr. Granot will be speaking in Hebrew. To find the translation to English, please check out the webinar chat. It has all the information. Rabbi Granot, בבקשה.
שלום, שלום לכם. שלום לכם בארץ, באמריקה. אני רוצה להתחיל ביום הזה ממש, ב-15 באוקטובר, זה מחר. ממש לפני שנה נכנסו המבשרים להודיע על נפילתו של אמיתי. היום הכי קשה בחיים, אתם יכולים להבין את זה, ואני תכף אדבר עליו. אבל אני רוצה לדבר לפני כן על 7 באוקטובר בשעה 6 בבוקר. זה חצי שעה לפני שהמתקפה החלה. אני התעוררתי בבוקר עצוב. למה הייתי עצוב? כי ביום כיפור בתל אביב התפוצצו תפילות. תפילה שצריכה להיות הדבר הכי עדין, הכי מחבר, הכי רוחני, הפכה להיות נושא למלחמה. בינינו, לא בינינו לבין האויבים שלנו, בינינו לבין היריבים היהודים שלנו. זה דבר נורא. ואני מיום כיפור שעבר עד שמחת תורה, ניסיתי עם חברים לשנות את המצב. ולהגיע למצב שבשמחת תורה יהיו הקפות שכולם השתתפו בהן. גם הגורמים במחאה, גם הגורמים בימין, כולם. וזה לא הצליח. ואנחנו החלטנו בישיבה, אני ראש ישיבה בתל אביב, שאנחנו לא נצא לרקוד עם ספרי תורה כמו כל שנה בתהלוכה בתל אביב. בגלל שאנחנו פחדנו שיהיה ביזיון של ספרי תורה, בגלל שפחדנו שיהיו מהומות. וקמתי עצוב בשמחת תורה. וחצי שעה אחר כך ב6:30 התחילו האזעקות. ובשעה 8 בבית הכנסת, בישיבה, במקום לומר הלל, אמרנו אבינו מלכנו עם ארון פתוח. ואני לא יכול לשכוח את היום הזה. ואני בטוח שיש קשר בין האכזבה שלי ב-6 בבוקר לבין מה שקרה אחר כך. בואו נניח לזה לרגע ונעבור ל-15 באוקטובר. בני אמיתי שהיה קצין בשריון. כל החיים שלו בחר. בחר לפי האמת הפנימית שלו. אף פעם הוא לא פעל באופן אוטומטי. גם ברגע האחרון של החיים שלו הוא בחר. ב-15 באוקטובר בשעה 4 לפנות בוקר, הוא התקשר לארוסתו, רוני, ואמר לה שביציאה הקרובה שלו מהצבא, אנחנו מתחתנים. והיא הייתה מאוד מופתעת ומאוד שמחה. 6 שעות אחר כך, התחיל הקרב האחרון שלו. נורה טיל על מושב שתולה והרג פועל. ונהרג שם פועל ערבי. והם נכנסו לקרב קשה. והצליחו לחסל 2 חוליות מחבלים של חיזבאללה. ואז הוא היה צריך לקבל את ההחלטה, אם הוא עולה לנקודה הכי גבוהה, ומסכן את עצמו. בפעם השלישית, או שהוא מקיים את ההבטחה שלו לרוני ארוסתו. והוא מאוד אהב את ארוסתו, ומאוד אהב את החיים. והוא רצה לחיות, והיה לו חלומות על נכדים. הוא כתב אותם ביומנים שלו. אבל הוא חשב על מושב שתולה, שכל התושבים שלו היו שם. והוא פחד שהטרוריסטים של חיזבאללה ייכנסו לתוך הארץ ויעשו נזק גדול. והוא החליט לעלות למעלה בפעם השלישית, ולהוציא את הראש שלו מתוך הטנק, כדי לראות שאין מחבלים. וזו בחירה ישראלית, בחירה יהודית. ואני רוצה רגע להרחיב את הבחירה הזאת. אם תסתכלו מזרחה אל העולם האסלאמי, יש שם הרבה מאוד אנשים שמוכנים למות, שגם מוכנים להקריב את הילדים שלהם. זה הרעיון של השהידים, להיות שהיד. אבל הם בכלל לא מעריכים את החיים, הם לא חושבים שהחיים הם קדושים. הם לא מסתכלים על החיים כתכלית. ואם תסתכלו מערבה, תמצאו עולם שמאוד מאוד אוהב את החיים, אבל הוא כמעט לא מוכן לתת אותם בשביל שום דבר. בשביל ערכים, בשביל אידיאלים, בשביל אמונה. הגדולה היהודית זה להאמין בחיים, לאהוב את החיים, לראות את החיים כקדושים, ולזכור שהחיים הם משמעותיים כשחיים אותם בשביל משהו שהוא יותר חשוב מהם. כמו עם ישראל, כמו נצח ישראל, כמו ערכים של מוסר ושל טוב. ועל זה אנחנו נלחמים עכשיו. נלחמים בשביל החיים, ונלחמים בשביל חיים טובים יותר, בשביל עולם טוב יותר. וזו נקודה אחת. ונקודה השנייה שגם היא קשורה למיקום שלנו בין המזרח למערב. המשפט הכי חשוב באמונה היהודית, believe. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. המילה אחד היא המילה שמתארת את אלוקים. המילה היחידה שהתורה מוכנה לתת. מה המשמעות של רעיון האחדות היהודי? אחדות שמופיעה בתוך ריבוי. יש עולם אינסופי, ויש אנשים עם דעות שונות ועם טוב שונה, והכל אחד. להכל יש מקור אחד, ולהכל יש תכלית אחת. goal, purpose, yes. ובאמצע ויש ריבוי, יש ריבוי. כן, יש הרבה. אנחנו מסתכלים מזרחה, העולם האסלאמי, שאנחנו מסתכלים עליו מזרחי, זה עולם שיש בו רק אחדות. הרעיון של אחד הוא רעיון שאין בו שום ריבוי. פוליטיקה אחת, אל אחד, אמת אחת, ועולם שצריך להיראות כולו אותו דבר. כשאנחנו מסתכלים מערבה, אנחנו רואים עולם שיש בו רק ריבוי. פלורליזם, אינדיבידואליזם, סובייקטיביזם, וכן הלאה. ואנחנו עומדים עם ישראל ואומרים, אנחנו שייכים למערב, כי אנחנו מאמינים בחירות. בחירות, in freedom. Yes. ואנחנו מאמינים באדם, באינדיבידואל, בכוחות שלו. אנחנו מאמינים שיש דעות שונות. אבל אנחנו מאמינים שיש אחדות. ושיש מקור להכל. ויש לנו משהו להגיד לעולם, משהו שלם. לא האחדות שמבטלת כל הבדלים, ולא הריבוי שלא מאפשר אחדות. ולכן לעולם המוסלמי כל כך קשה איתנו. לא רק בגלל שאנחנו זרוע של אמריקה, אלא גם בגלל שאנחנו זרוע של המונותאיזם, אנחנו המקור של המונותאיזם. והאתגר הזה שלנו, הוא קודם כל אתגר פנימי שלנו בתוך עם ישראל. כי ב7 באוקטובר, כשאני התעוררתי עצוב, זה היה בגלל שלא הצלחנו לפתור את הבעיה של דעות שונות שמסתדרות באחדות. התפרקנו. ושכחנו שהברית הישראלית והיהודית, מהרגע הראשון שלה, מבוססת על זה שיש המון שבטי ישראל. ושברגע שנוסדה מדינת ישראל, עם ישראל היה מפוזר ומפורד כמו שהוא לא היה מעולם. והוא הביא את כל הדעות מכל העולם. ואת כל התרבויות מכל העולם. וזאת משמעות הברית שלנו. להפוך את זה לכוח, ולא לתת לזה להיות חולשה. ואני חושב שהמלחמה לימדה אותנו שאנחנו יכולים לעשות את זה. כי המלחמה הזאת היא חושך גדול, חושך אישי בשבילי, וחושך בשביל כל עם ישראל. אבל מתוך החושך הזה מתגלים אורות גדולים. קודם כל באנשים שלנו. אבל מעבר לזה, בהבנה של עם ישראל, שאנחנו יכולים לעבוד ביחד, ולא רק בגלל שיש אויב משותף, אלא בגלל שיש לנו מקורות משותפים, ובגלל שיש לנו רוח משותפת. וזה האתגר שלנו ברגע הזה. עם ישראל יכול לקום על הרגליים, והאתגר הוא לא רק לנצח במלחמה, אלא לנצח את היצר הרע שלנו, לנצח את הפלגנות, לנצח את הפלגנות שבתוכנו, את המריבה שבתוכנו. לנצח את המחשבה שאני יודע הכל, לנצח את המחשבה שמי שבצד השני הוא אדם שלילי, הוא רוצה לעשות רע, ולשתף את כל הכוחות בארץ ישראל ובחוץ לארץ, כדי שעם ישראל יהיה במקום הראוי לו. ביום הכיפורים האחרון היה תיקון גדול. הישיבה שלנו, יחד עם ארגון צוהר, הובילה תפילה ענקית בכיכר החטופים בתל אביב. הצעקות של אבינו מלכנו ושל שמע ישראל הגיעו עד השמיים, ומילאו את תל אביב. והיו שם מכל קצות תל אביב אנשים הכי רדיקליים שאתם יכולים לחשוב עליהם. והם הרגישו שהם יכולים לעמוד שם ביחד, ושהם יכולים להפנות את המבט לשמיים, ולהתפלל ביחד. אז יש לי הרבה סיבות לקוות לטוב, ויש לי הבנה שהמשבר שלנו יקבל משמעות אם נעמוד ביחד ונהפוך אותו לטוב. ונעשה את זה ביחד, יהודי הגולה ויהודי ארץ ישראל. תודה רבה לכם.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Tamir Granot, for sharing with us the memory of your son, Amitai, sharing with us your pain and allowing for us to also be a part of it and hold it, and also giving us a great task ahead, that following your story, we do not have the luxury, the ability to be frozen, just to listen, but that all of us right now also have to open ourselves, tell our story, and we're going to do that now together. So in the next 15 minutes, we're going to divide the attendees into breakout groups of 4. You're going to have to open your cameras. We're asking you to share a little bit of yourself, your story. Each of you are going to introduce yourselves, who you are, where you're from, why you're joining us today. And we're going to ask you 2 central questions to answer together. First, just like we asked our panelists, how has this period impacted your Jewish identity? Tell us what your October 7th story, how this period has impacted you. And second, within this pain, where have you found hope and belonging within this time? Again, we're going to break you out into groups. We're going to have actually our panelists join some of you. So you might have a Dara Horn or a Nama Klar in your session. And together, we want to hear from you. How has this period impacted your Jewish identity? Where have you found hope and belonging? And then after, we're going to all come back together for a closing and hear again from Kaylee. Thank you so much and good luck. We'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to those who are rejoining us. I know that we cut many of you off in mid-sentence, but we hope that your discussions were interesting and left you wanting more, not less. If everyone in the chat could write a word, a thought, a reflection based on an idea, a leaving thought that you had from your time in the breakout groups together, perhaps from the panel that you're leaving with. We did a lot today in the last 90 minutes on an emotional, intellectual level, exercising our memory, our story in this time. And we so appreciate you sharing your time and your experiences with all of us. We want to thank our panelists, Dr. Rabbi Tamir Granot, all of you for participating. If you have any questions or follow-up, please be in touch with me. We sent you a survey and we'll send you more information. And finally, to finish us off, we have Kaylee, who is going to lead us in a prayer for the hostages and Hatikva. Thank you. Shana Tova. And Kaylee.
יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שתחזק ותשמור ותנצור את אחינו בית ישראל, השבויים והשבויות, בעבור שאנו מתפללים בעבורם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, ישמרם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. יוציאם מחושך וצל מוות, וישיבם מהרה לחיק משפחותיהם, ונאמר אמן. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים בין בים בשם. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין בים בשם. המקום ירחם עליהם, ויוציאם מצרה לרווחה, ומאפלה לאורה, ומשעבוד לגאולה שתה, בגלה ובזמן קריב. כל עוד בלבב פנימה, נפש יהודי הומייה, ופאתי מזרח קדימה, עין לציון צופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you all, and good evening. Wishing you a a year of peace, of health, and a victory for our Am Yisrael. Tada.